the first epistle of St. Peter, chapter 3, verses 15 to 22. 22nd, the 22nd verse of 1 Peter. But in your hearts, sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an account of the hope that is in you. Yet, do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear so that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it's better to suffer for doing good. If suffering should be God's will, then it is to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins, once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 people, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. This is the word of the Lord. In this short passage, Peter does a great job of what we need for step 3. Step 3 of our church growth plan, which, if you haven't gotten copies from the last couple of weeks, we've got some extras up here. I think there are extras in the back. We're talking about invitation this week. How to invite people to come to church. How to invite people to follow God. And so Peter begins simply by calling out the challenge. Here's the simple challenge. Here's what it all boils down to. When it's time to say something, you say something. Be ready always to give an answer to anyone that asketh you the reason for the hope that is in you. That's how the King James Version renders it. The NRSV, more modern translation, says, be ready to give a defense to anyone who demands from you an account of the hope that is in you. But do it gently, respectfully. Do it with meekness and fear. And immediately after Peter talks about this, he talks about being maligned for it and being abused. But remember, Christ also suffered because Christ also invited. Christ also proclaimed. Christ also said what needed to be said to the spirits in prison. And a second later, just right after he says, when it's time to say something, you say something, Peter's explaining the gospel. He's giving another gospel presentation, and this is how baptism works, and this is what Christ did for us on the cross. And he gives, in just a couple short verses, another reiteration of that same old story that I've loved so long. It's tremendous. And it is especially tremendous for what we are working to learn today, which is the importance of opening your mouth and actually asking for what you want. I could almost have used James 4:2. You have not because you ask not. But of course, James 4:2 applies from us to God, but all of those dynamics are mirrored in each other. If you've missed a few sermons in this series, I will review. In 2020, we are beginning to see clearly, with 2020 vision, God's vision for this church, which we discerned in community together last year. And that is to be a church that touches the community around us with love and truth. And the community around us isn't just defined geographically, but it's defined relationally. It's the people that we bump into, the people that we are near by, that we interact with. And we're being called to recognize that if we do that, if we do the work that God has asked churches to do, God will keep us around as a church. God will preserve us and grow us and multiply us. Now that alone is a huge concept, that if we do the work of the church, we'll be a growing and successful church. It's a preliminary concept. It comes before the 5 steps, but it is huge. If we could just grasp that message, it would do so much for our anxiety, for our worry. If you've ever spent time worried for this church or worried for the church in America, this is the concept for you. Churches succeed by being good churches. Period. That's why I don't feel all doom and gloom about Pew Research studies, news about the churches in America are in decline, millennials don't like going to church, all that stuff. Because the only churches that are in decline, follow me, are declining churches. Effective churches, churches that do the work that God sent them to do, will always grow. Because that's true by definition. It's like the fruit tree. Do you remember that parable? A good tree grows good fruit. Because that's how words work. It's a tautology. Rubber tires are made of rubber. If it grows bad fruit, it's not a good tree. If it's not growing good fruit and it wants to be a good tree, it should start to grow good fruit. And then it'll be good. If it's a good church, it should make disciples. It should grow. Healthy things grow. If it doesn't grow, it should start. And I know that talking like that, talking about our church growing, worries some of you, because you don't want to imagine us focusing on growth until we're enormous. You like your small local community church. And I want to say a couple of things to that. First, the most important thing I want to say, the reason I'm talking about it in a sermon, is that I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I hear your feedback. Your feelings matter to me. And I love that you love this service and this place as it is. And this plan, this vision we're receiving from God recognizes that. In fact, the reason this is our way forward is because it appreciates that in order not to substantially change our worship styles and practices and traditions, what we need to do is substantially change our hearts and substantially change our pips, our people in the pews, and empower them to move and pray and communicate and invite and turn them into props. Another thing I want to say is that I love that people are worried about it, that they hear this is how to grow a church, and they're like, hey, now, let's not get carried away, because that appreciates and that recognizes that that's a real danger. And it is. We could burst at the seams and need to buy a new building. That's possible if we wanted that. With unmitigated success, we could be enormous. God is mighty, and there is no elixir of church growth that the largest and most powerful church in the land can buy that is more potent than this simple plan. This is the nuclear bomb. There isn't anything bigger. Finally. But that's not the plan. But it's possible. And so if you're worried about that, then you're worried about the right thing. You don't need to be worried of what if this doesn't work. No, if we do this, it'll work. You could worry about us not doing it, us not being faithful to it, us not really praying, us not really communicating. But finally, know that it's not the ambition we discern together. And I've said this as I address the other ones. Our ambition is to build and maintain pips by making them into props. Build and maintain people in pews by making them into people reaching out of pews. To teach every Christian to become more mature and to influence people with the gospel. And it won't make us, if we do that really successfully, if everybody in all of our pews turns into effective props, It won't make us into an enormous church. It'll make us into a planting church. That's plan A. That's the dream, perfect, ideal world, 2030, 2050, a planting church, a church that spawns other churches all over the region, where we will be what we want to be to one another, and we will be empowered with the gospel to make more churches like that and different from that all over, that can be the same thing to each other and can teach each other how to make disciples, like mustard, growing and ministering everywhere and getting into everything. So how do we do it? What are the nuts and the bolts? Well, step one is prayer. And that's where most of us are. That's the challenge that most of us are on, and it's where most of us are going to be for a while, to get used to praying daily for people who aren't saved, that are in our lives. But if we do the small things right, and if we invite God into the process, He will help us to do the big things right. So we need to pray for the people around us who need to hear the gospel. We need to pray for people besides our own family. We need to pray Luke 10:2, perhaps at 10:02 every morning, for God to send out workers into the harvest field. Step 2 is communicate. Let your light shine. Be open and public about your Christianity. Don't let it be a secret. On your block, at your work, with your friends, is your Christianity known, and is it knowable? Would people looking at you, seeing how you act and how you talk, see Jesus? That's communication. Step 3 is the hardest. I actually think it's the hardest one of them all, of all 5. You actually have to make the invitation. Be ready always to give an answer to anyone who asks you. Unlike the first 2, you can't do this one all the time. You can be letting your light shine every moment of every day. You can be praying while you're stuck in traffic on your way to work. But you only get the chance to invite when the opportunity comes. And when there's an opening, you've got to be ready. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be practiced. But this is also the step that makes the most difference. It's the move that makes the cash register ding. It's where the change happens. And our success of reaching people with the work of this church, reaching people with the gospel, will correlate exactly with our success at inviting and bringing people. If we invite 100 people, we'll get a certain number of new members. If we invite 1,000 people, we'll get 10 times more. If we invite 1,000 people, we won't get 1,000 new members. Some of them will say no. But if we invite more and we bring more, we'll get more, period. We'll get more no's too. But we got to love those no's. We got to collect those no's. That's a sign of faithfulness. The best training I ever got in invitation was 10 years ago. When I was first hired, way back in the Stone Age, 2009, when I was hired with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. So I'm 23, and I've lived all of my life closer to the beach than we are now. Never been as far from the beach as Orlando is. And I am praying to God, saying, here I am, Lord, send me. I'm out of college. I can do anything. Where are you calling me? And I'm imagining that God will send me to some exotic locale as a missionary. I'm ready to go to a tropical island somewhere, or to a remote village in a Cold War country. And God sends me to Kansas. American as apple pie, 80% already Christian, in the absolute geographic center of the United States, farthest from a beach in all directions as it is possible to get on this continent. There are like some areas in Siberia that are farther. But that wasn't the hard part. I was doing stuff on the campus that was really, really challenging, just at the edge of what I was capable of as a young 20-year-old. I was running a ministry of well over 100 people. I was working with school administrators and generally learning to act like a professional who had a real job. I was living on my own, over 1,500 miles from anyone I had known prior to this. But that wasn't the hard part. There were cross-cultural challenges in InterVarsity all over the place. It was just fraught with them. For one thing, I was coming to this institution, InterVarsity, as an outsider. People don't join staff of InterVarsity usually unless they've been an InterVarsity student. That's how they hear about it. That's how they apply for the job. But I went to a Christian school. We didn't have InterVarsity, so I'm learning all of the culture of how they work while also coming to the central region of the United States and learning how they're different from the surfers out in California. I didn't even know how to drive in the snow. And I was working extensively with international students and with black students and with the black church, and I'd never experienced any of that before. But that, you guessed it, was not the hard part. Do you know what the hard part was? I had to ask for money. I was on a missionary salary. I was a missionary. And I had a missionary's requirements to raise support. And so I wrote letters and I made appointments and I made lists of everyone I knew who might support the work. And then afterwards, I had to keep in touch with them and write monthly updates. I had to call people and ask them for help. I had to cold call people I'd never known but who were alumni of Kansas State and who might get to know me so I could make an appointment so I could ask them for money. And my parents were not on board with this. They were theoretically supportive of ministry, but they were not excited about the fact that their college-educated kid who they'd paid a bunch of money for was now begging for a living. And none of that was nearly as hard as actually making the ask. Would you please donate? Can I ask you to write a check today? If you would be willing to set up monthly giving, there's a website. I have a laptop here. We could actually do that right now, or you could do that when you get home on your own laptop. Here's the website. Can I trust you? Can you commit to giving? Would you give just $5 a month to be a part of this work I'm doing? Would you be able to give $50 per month? Can you give $500 per month? I can say it now, but in the moment, those words were like boulders. It felt like I had this script, and I planned it, and I knew I was supposed to say those things, and it came time, and I might as well have been reading the back of a prescription bottle. Be like, donate? It is so hard to make the ask. It's so much easier to say anything else. So much easier to just drop hints all day. So I raise support. That's really hard. I don't know what you think about that. It's easier to say no for them. That's one thing we do a lot. You probably are not able to right now. That's okay. Or even before that, I don't need to call this person. I don't need to set up an appointment with them. They're not going to give. They don't want to give. But if they're doing the hard thing of giving you money, you need to be able to do the hard thing of asking for it. I might even argue the harder thing of asking for it. Most of us would rather pay out of pocket to do something like go on a mission trip than raise support and ask money for people around us to pay for us to go on a mission trip. It's really hard. But only by asking the big donor, would you give $500, do you ever get to hear, no, but I could give $250. Only by hearing no a bunch of times do you hear yes. And it was great training in ministry and in evangelism and in spiritual formation. It was incredibly humbling in a really good and true and Christ-like and excruciating way. You know, the word humble is related to the word humiliate. For many of us, invitation is the same way. Most of us are not having to fundraise personal ministry endeavors, but the things that we want to ask people to do, we have a hard time getting the words out. Many of us are really, really good at wanting people to come to church with us. We are not so good at actually asking if they'd like to come at 10:30 this week. Many of us hope that lots of people will come to game night. Not many of us bring people from outside the church to game night. Many of us have friends and loved ones who we wish would hear and receive the gospel and follow Jesus. Few of us actually share with them the gospel message that salvation is by grace and not works, out loud with our mouths making noise. It just gets really hard in those moments. It gets really scary. The words won't come out. And we say people's no for them, rather than risk hearing a no. But some of them want to come. Some of them want to know. Some of them want to hear. And if we don't ask, they'll think they're not wanted, not invited, not important enough. If they're going to take the risk of actually going into an unfamiliar environment where people might be mean to them and there's going to be all these religious people around and they might try to hug you and who knows what's going to happen, then we have to be able to take the risk of saying something and inviting them. Some of them even need to tell you no. They want to be invited so that they can say no. And then they will see what you do with their no. Whether you respect it, whether you do it with gentleness and respect, and whether you treat them differently afterwards, whether they become worthless to you once they're not a convert project. And if not, if you respond well and you respect the no and you continue in relationship and love and faithfulness, it can be a great step towards a bigger yes. No, I don't want to see that new Christian movie with you. I'm not a Christian and I don't like movies very much. But you mentioned the other day that you go to a prayer group on Wednesdays. I wonder if I would be allowed to come to that because I'm dealing with some stuff and I need a miracle. I don't really know how it works. Am I allowed? I'll try anything. Invitation is more than just that final ultimate invitation that asks people to come to Jesus, that asks people to give their life over to follow Jesus as Lord. I hope you see that. That is included, but that's just one example. It is great and valuable and important for you to be able and willing to share what Christianity means to you, to someone who needs that. And that's all you need to do. Just share what Christianity means to you, what you think of as Christianity. But where that comes from, the skill that is used for that, the skill that will make you ready to answer when that time comes and the people need to hear that, is not the skill of being a well-seasoned, well-studied theology expert. You don't need that. It's not about memorizing a script perfectly or having the greatest model of evangelism that explains all the parts of it in under 30 seconds. It's not a tract or a tool or a doohickey that you need to share how to come to Jesus. It's about whether or not you're willing to take the risk and clear your throat and ask. Invite them to follow Jesus. And so, when we learn how to invite smaller, easier things, we get better. When we practice easy mode, we get better at normal mode, we get better at hard mode. So, For the past couple weeks, I've had some kind of increasing challenges. And of course, these are predicated upon each other. So if you're not praying right now, don't get frustrated that your invitations aren't working and you're not getting lots of opportunities to invite. Pray first. Ask God to do a miracle. And then communicate. And if you pray and then you communicate, then maybe you'll have a chance to invite someone to have lunch with you and some other church folk. Hey, would you like to come? I've got a friend. We like to go to Tijuana Flats. I'll pay. I'll pay helps. Makes it a lot easier. You could say you'll pay. That would be a harder invitation if you want to add some extra resistance training to it. But if you want to make it easier, hey, why don't you come to lunch with us? Or you could pray and then communicate and then invite to one of the outreach events that we have going on at our church, like scrapbooking. That would be a little harder. Hey, why don't you come? Come scrapbook with us. Or you could pray and then communicate and then invite to a midweek religious event, like a Bible study. It's going to be a small group of ladies. There'll be wine there. It'll be fun. Or you could pray and communicate and then invite to Sunday service. Why don't you come check it out? See what we're about. It's no commitment. We're not going to sell you anything. It's just a Sunday service. Just if you don't like it, don't come back. Try it out. Or the hardest one. Pray, communicate, and then invite someone to give their life away to Jesus Christ. Would you like to accept Jesus into your heart today? Would you pray with me? Just pray what you feel. Just pray what you want. You can come to church afterwards. They'll preach about it. We can fix things afterwards. But if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to become a Christian, you can. It's that simple. Do you want to be a Christian? I want to charge you and bless you with the words from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will go with you wherever you go.